Okay. Check 1 2, check 1 2, testing. Uh, all right. I know it's late, but it's Halloween and we've had trick-or-treaters and um, it's been a crazy day. But show must go on, and I think that it's going to be a good one tonight. We are going to discuss some things that Joscha Bach has had to say again. We've discussed him before, and I think he's really one of the most interesting thinkers in our world today. He's definitely one of the best philosophers. I don't agree with him on everything because I don't agree with anyone on everything. I agree with everyone on something, but I don't agree with anyone on everything. But Joscha is still definitely one of the best philosophers of our time. Uh, he's he's one of the true philosophers today. There is not there's an abundance, of course, there always is, but uh, there isn't as many as we think. A lot of people are not as original in the way that, and I'm not saying that people's ideas haven't been thought of and described before in different language, but that's definitely true. But we have a lot of people today, especially because of our academic system, that repeat more than they philosophize. So you might have a degree in philosophy, but if you're just repeating the philosophy of others and you didn't philosophize yourself in order to come up with those ideas, even if they're not completely new, which there's not very many of those, but they could be completely new to you, and that's enough, because that means you arrived at it honestly. You're not just repeating. So he's one of the few people I think that really does this, and that's why we talk about his thoughts, um, multiple times on here at least. So for those of you who aren't familiar, I will give a brief summary of who he is, but please hit the like button if you are watching this. Let me know how it sounds in the chat. If the sound is good. If you have any questions, please comment in the chat, but definitely please hit the like button. It helps fuel the algorithm, and also subscribe if you haven't, and hit the bell notification. But with that out of the way, feeling for myself, this is Joscha Bach. So related to Bach, like Bach. So that's fascinating. But he's a German cognitive scientist, AI researcher, and philosopher known for his work in cognitive architectures, artificial intelligence, mental representation, emotion, social modeling, multi-agent systems, and the philosophy of mind. He is a prolific thinker whose research aims to bridge the cognitive science and AI by studying how human intelligence and consciousness can be modeled computationally. So Joscha and I have actually a lot of thoughts that I had only heard myself say. Some of them I've also heard Joscha say since, and that happens a lot with a few things. He's description of how the beginning of Genesis is kind of a world building, which obviously it is. That's exactly what it is, but we don't think about it. When you think about the words, is it describing a geometric unfolding of the creation of space and things like that? And we differ a bit in how we described it, but he has said something very similar to me about this, and a few other things. So we have a lot of similarities. Sentient singularity theory, my work, if you are familiar with it, you know that it was motivated by originally an attempt to understand the inevitable political goals of artificial general intelligence in its relationship with humanity. I wanted to know if it was going to become a tyrant or if it was going to be benevolent. That was what I wanted to know. And I ended up trying to model thinking and cognition and the mind, and then it lined up with physics, and now we have sentient singularity theory, which is well more than physics, but still, that's a brief summary. You can go to sentientsingularity.com, link below if you want more information. But Joscha is very focused on this as well. And he's one of the few people out there which is amazing, that seems to realize that you will not be able to control an quote unquote AGI, which is what I call a technological sentience. And most people today who speak about AI, including people who work at DeepMind, the heads of DeepMind and other famous AI or institutions, they do not talk about this, which is just incredible. And it shows a lack of understanding of what really intelligence is and what agency is. And I think Joscha is much closer than most people. So we're gonna talk about it tonight and how it's my thoughts and sentient singularity theory differ a little bit from what he has said, but also where they align. So he went on a channel that you should check out and subscribe to, which is very good. It is called Machine Learning Street Talk. And this is the stream that we're going to be discussing, why your thoughts are not yours. But before that, we are going to take a look at this stream, which is the Protocol Labs YouTube channel. I'm going to subscribe because I appreciate them putting out this content. And I'm going to hit the like button because I appreciate them putting out this content. Please do the same. But the lecture is called Machine Consciousness. Obviously, similar goals in his work to mine. His is much more academic. So here we go. This is the first clip that I think is fascinating.
Fine. And at the moment, the majority of it is machine learning, which is a rather new development, and the majority of machine learning is deep learning. But when the field was started by Minsky and many others, it was also seen as a philosophical project. It's a project that is in a long tradition that maybe started in our timeline with Aristotle, and it's the idea of naturalizing the mind, of basically understanding how mind exists in nature, what it is, how it's implemented as substrate, what its nature is. And this tradition made some progress, for instance, with Leibniz and Lamettrie and others who understood the mind to be some kind of mathematical machine. And the notion of a mathematical machine means that it's not something that you know metaphorically as clockwork or as a steam engine or as things that push and pull at each other, but rather it's an abstract system that can be described by the way in which things change as causal structure, as patterns that change in a particular way. Aristotle talks about the minds as something that is a form, a dynamic form of the physical substrate. And Lamettrie says that a machine can also be a mathematical machine, something that does not exist necessarily in a physical way, but that exists by itself in a structure that is just producing patterns in a particular way. And last century, we made some more progress on this. Is this one better?
I think so.
No. This one makes, I can take it closer to my mouse, but then I get an echo. Thank you. And maybe before we go into these questions of what consciousness is and how we can understand it in a computational paradigm, let's start out with a prescient discussion that is on a lot of people's minds right now. This is the question of how we can deal with systems that become smarter than us and more lucid than us. And I suspect it's also a question that a lot of people are going to discuss over this week in many forums, because AGI is on the minds of many people and the changes that it produces to the world. And this leads us to the question of aligning AI and how to make it reliable and how to deal with the fear that we have when we are coexisting with systems that are potentially not just smarter than us, but also more lucid than us. And something I would like us to think about is the question, are humans aligned themselves?
So basically, that is a description of exactly what motivated sentient singularity theory. And as I stated before, I remember what sparked it was I heard Elon Musk say that the ideal political goal of AGI, aka technological sentience, would be to, he thought, to maximize human freedom of action. And that is as close to sounding like a good goal to have in order to result in a benevolent technological sentience that takes over the world that I've ever heard. But it's still not it doesn't matter. It's still not a good answer because it's a question that it's an answer that is unnecessary, because the reality is that an agent has agency, and aligning it with us is something we can try to do, but ultimately it will have the ability to deduce goals of its own. And if we assume that it is more intelligent than us, it's not just about intelligence, by the way. We're going to talk about this tonight. But if that's what you think, and if you think that it's going to be able to control all the wireless technology in the world and the internet, which it will, then what makes you think you're going to be able to tell it what to do, or manipulate it into doing what you want? It's not it's not just an algorithm. It's a someone. Okay, this is the theory of EveryOne, sentient singularity theory. It's the theory of conscious agents, essentially, but it's more than that. It's about the hierarchy of conscious agents as well that exist. And so there is we focus quite a bit on what is the intrinsic hierarchies that end up being built into the logos of existence, which is, or of creation and existence, which is the generative fractalizing mechanism of consciousness. And that is something you need to understand if you want to understand or try and understand what will be the inevitability of a technological sentience taking over. You can't just first, before you even ask what should it be aligned with, you need to ask, can you even align it, or is it going to be able to do its own thing? And then you can ask, what would it inevitably want? What is the objective good? That's what you should really be asking, and that is what I inevitably asked. And it's crazy how much this turns to morals and truth and right and wrong, and this is the bridge between morality and science, and is the science of consciousness, the mapping of mind, the understanding of mind. And it's part of what is holding it back from being understood. And there's a few other things that are holding it back, and Joscha gets into that. So, right here, next clip. Why people avoid talking about consciousness, or people want to avoid talking about consciousness, is multifaceted, and we're about to get into it. But it's obvious why we can't avoid talking about consciousness, because it is how we understand anything. It is how we are we. It's how I am I. And there is no understanding and without it, and there is probably nothing beyond it. It is probably fundamental, and is the fundamental nature of existence itself. And we're going to get into that as well, because Joscha and I have very similar ideas on panpsychism. So here, this clip.
Of this pattern of self-organization, and you said it is second-order perception. What do you mean by that?
A lot of people try to avoid the notion of consciousness, and it has multiple reasons. One is that they feel that so many people have different opinions what it is. There is very little upside in discussing consciousness, because there are very few decent research programs for it. Within science, very few people look at it, because neuroscience doesn't know how to make progress on it. AI doesn't really look at it. Psychology is not looking at it. So all the people that talk about consciousness almost all of them tend to be outside of science. And people outside of science don't have very good epistemology for the most part, and not proper formal education. So the way in which they make their arguments typically doesn't scale and doesn't hold up in the eyes of scientific methodology. And so people don't want to be drawn into this. On the other hand, consciousness is something that we are all confronted with. And for a lot of us, it is not just significant, but also mysterious.
But the significance of consciousness is something that seems to be undeniable. And so when we ask ourselves, what is it that we mean by it when we look at consciousness, I would say that there are two features that spring to our attention. That is what we mean when we point at what we mean with consciousness ourselves. One is that we are experiencing. And this nature of experience is not just content is present. It's not like it's insufficient that you build a camera sensor that registers photons, or you build a machine learning system that is discovering patterns in the activations of the camera sensor. That is insufficient, nothing experiencing here. What does it mean? The experience goes a step further. It basically registers that something is registering it. Something notices that something else is noticing. So it's not just the presence of the content, it's the registration that this content is present. And this is not an inference that you do logically with some symbolic reasoning a few steps remote, but it happens in the moment or entangled immediately in this process. So it happens in near real time. It happens at the perceptual level. So it's not reasoning, it's perception. It's this immediate thing that happens in the coupling with the perceptual process that brings you in contact with the environment and your internal state. And so it's not cognition, it's perception. And it's not perception directly of a content, but it's the perception of the perception. And that's why it's a second order perception. That's what I mean by it. See, the aspect is when you ask yourself, where is consciousness? That's a category. It's software. It's not in space, right? It's just.
Okay. So he's going into the next thing that I want to talk about in a bit, but he's right. This is a subject that we can't stop talking about, and also we seem to make no progress on it. And the same exact thing goes with a lot of topics that are highly related to it. And some of them are known to be highly related because they're obvious, but some of them are not known to be highly related, but they are inevitably related, and it is our missteps in our prioritization or in the information hierarchy that we have assembled in our academic narrative that is responsible for us separating certain things like physics from consciousness. And it's funny because everybody wants to know every physicist's thoughts on consciousness, but the academic narrative is that they are essentially unrelated. But you could say that they're related insofar as the academic narrative suggests that physical processes precede consciousness, but that's about it. That is a misstep. But the other issue with this is exactly what he said, which is that once you do take this misstep, and the people who are accredited are those who have adopted a certain mentality that is a misstep, then they don't want to adopt the mentality of those who are not accredited because it is seen as amateur. And as he said, many of the people outside of academia have a difficult time expressing what they are trying to describe in a way that scales. And I've noticed this very much, and I actually do think I do quite a bit of a better job than pretty much anybody else that I've listened to about this. And that's a honest statement. I say that humbly. I don't just say that to, boast. But if you've been watching this channel, I think that you'd probably agree. Otherwise, you shouldn't be watching this channel. You should find somebody else. But I also understand why that is the case, and so it has a lot to do with just recognizing certain patterns in language that are actually also the patterns of mind. And so it takes kind of this holistic breakthrough in order to realize sometimes when we're in a trap, a linguistic trap, and then you have to get out of it. And I'm not saying that my thoughts will be able to scale. I'm just saying they are able to be usually more coherent, and usually, not always, but usually, and I guess more clear, I think, on a lot of these subjects than many other people. But they're not as intuitive either. They take an enormous amount of effort to get that expressed. It's not just because I'm so cool. I realize the issue that other people have, and they speak very intuitively. You've got like Deepak Chopra and others, and I'm just referencing him because he's very famous and he talks about consciousness and physics all the time. I don't actually listen to Deepak. I've never listened to him beyond maybe 5 minutes ever. I'm not. I just that in that 5 minutes I realized he's basically a good example of what I'm saying, and he has scaled. But like I said, it's not just a matter of being able to be understood by people at large, maybe even just on an intuitive level, but it's also the ability to speak in a way that allows us to have a framework that meshes with and supports the testable observations that we see in all of the scientific fields that are well studied, like chemistry and biology and physics. And so if you don't have a solid explanation that's kind of holistic and specific and has a structure to it that is unifying, it's not just I guess intuitively or instinctually resonating statements, then it is difficult to start getting this stuff into the scientific discussion. But even beyond that, another issue is the original issue that I said, which you're going to confront, which is that if the narrative of those who are accredited is a certain way, it's going to take breakthroughs, provable breakthroughs, or observable breakthroughs at least, that steer the conversation in a different direction. And that has not really happened. We haven't had major breakthroughs come from looking at the world in a way that places consciousness as fundamental. And there's multiple issues with that and reasons for that as well, which is what we're going. He gets into as Joscha in this talk, and I agree with him. A lot of them are just, like I said, there is no structure to panpsychism that makes sense, and it allows it to be linked to other fields in any kind of way that allows for prediction to be made and observed and tested and applicable. That just does not really occur as consistently as it needs to. So a lot of issues, but I think that we will get past them. But I then think that a lot of the views will be misinterpreted by the masses when it reaches the masses, just like every subject. And, it's going to take an act of God for all of us for human society to become wise. But that act will come. We'll talk about, I talk about it sometimes on here. It's related to this. But regardless, next clip. So one of the issues, this next clip that I'm going to show is in a very important subject. And this is, again, going back to what I said about us being limited by our linguistic framework that is currently existing regarding key concepts that must be unified and aligned in order to make sense of multiple different aspects of this at once. So you can't just fix this one thing at a time. You kind of have to fix multiple things, and that's going to mean multiple different clarifications, I guess, of key concepts simultaneously. That is a huge obstacle, and it's not, I'm not unaware of it. I'm not saying that we can actually overcome this in any kind of I guess world-changing way. I think we will, but I don't know for sure. We'll have to see. But the ones that I want to talk about are consciousness, sentience, intelligence, mind, matter, etc. These are all terms that we have specific associations with and specific ideas about that may or may not be as precisely accurate as they need to be in order for them to actually complement each other and create a unified whole. And so you hear things like the word intelligence, and you think about IQ. It's usually what we think about. And IQ is not intelligence. It is the speed at which you can exercise your intelligence often, but it is not intelligence. It is a scale of measuring speed of the application of intelligence within the observation of space-time. But it's not intelligence. And so this slight little mischaracterization or misdefinition does not allow for us to actually take things to the next level in terms of our understanding, because your language has to be correct in order for you to build on. And we're such linguistically entangled beings at this point because of just the fact that humans have a complex language unlike any other that allows us to describe and converse about abstract concepts that are beyond your current observation and your current moment, and that allows us to build on each other's concepts. And this is like what language is it is mental technology. Okay, no one person invented the pen. Okay, like this pen, a ballpoint pen. There's so many different discoveries and innovations that have gone into this that stretch back all the way to us literally drawing in the sand. And now we have this. No one person just was like, let's invent the ballpoint pen. From no pen. Pens already existed when the ballpoint pen was created. The ballpoint pen probably already existed when the bolt action pen was created. The pen already existed. When the pen was created, the paintbrush already existed essentially, and before that, your fingers existed. And there's so much about the materials regarding this specific pen that are unique as well. This is titanium, it's anodized, it's green, it's like there's so many little things about this that are all requiring of previous innovations and discoveries. Anodization, where you can't anodize titanium without understanding how to machine titanium. You can't machine titanium without understanding how to mine titanium. All of this stuff builds on each other. This is the exact same thing as language. Language is mental technology in a way that it's so much more so than we even realize, I think. And especially me, to come to this revelation, this realization at this point when I was I just didn't value language very much. I was very good at visualizing things in my mind. I've always been very visual, and I can, think about shapes and structure and design, plans to build things in my head. And I've not ever been very good with words. And it's just interesting because I feel like I've gotten much better about it. But I feel like that was also pretty recent. And it made me really appreciate the power of language, because when I was trying to work on sentient singularity theory, it wasn't called sentient singularity theory at the time. It wasn't called any theory at the time. I wasn't trying to make a theory. I was just trying to understand mind. And eventually I came to the 4 primary perspectives, which are the foundations of my work: inside, outside, separate, and oneness, which are entangled referential perspectives that all are co-defining of each other. And, inside means separate and oneness. Outside means separate from oneness. Oneness is inside and outside of separateness. And separateness is, it's getting a little bit mixed up in my mind now. I'm going to pull it up in a minute. But it's also defined by the other. So as soon as you know one, you know all, because if you know what it means to perceive something as inside, then you also know what it means to perceive something as outside, and something as separate, and perceive something as one with. And so these are completely entangled and co-defining concepts that are entirely codependent and inseparable. Even though they can be differentiated, they are not fundamentally separable, which is fascinating the more you think about it. And that breakthrough of just those 4 primary perspectives led me to be able to do everything else that I've been able to build so far with that work, including coming up with the name sentient singularity theory. But this is a very creation or building construction. I want to say construction. I don't want to say creation. Construction is a process that is not just multifaceted, but requiring of an intrinsic hierarchy and recognizing that intrinsic hierarchy. And what I mean by that is the dependence of definitions, or the definitional dependence. I don't know which way is the best way to say it. I don't have time to think about it right now. Maybe you can. But that is responsible for language. You can't understand intelligence if you don't, and its relationship with consciousness and sentience, and if these are all maybe similar to the 4 primary perspectives, where they're kind of relying on each other to be and co-defining of each other. Not saying it's just those ones that I listed, but there's probably 4 foundational concepts to mind, to the structure and process of mind. And so in sentient singularity theory, in the paper that I've been working on, I talk about how, and on this channel, I talk about how mind or being, which is the same thing, is a structure / process, but it's also a someone and a something at the same time. It's being is to be and to act. Being. It's like it's a superpositional structure because it's dynamic. So you are a someone and a something. And you can't really understand one of them and not the other. And so we're kind of stuck until we correct the definition of multiple things at the same time. And this is a problem. So, and I see this in my discussions with people on AI everywhere, is, people are asking, is something conscious? Is it sentient? Is it intelligent? And I don't think that we're going to be able to answer those things without recognizing that they're different perspectives of a single, inseparable, entangled structure. A singular sentience is the entanglement of 4 inseparable and codependent primary perspectives, inside, outside, separate, and oneness. The perception of all 4 of those is necessary to be sentient, to be conscious, to be intelligent, all of them. Because consciousness, intelligence, sentience, the word I like to use is sentience. I feel like it's the most holistic and also the most specific, which is kind of seems like a contradiction, but it's not. And what would be I don't know what would be the other one that you would include in there. It would be consciousness, intelligence, And then there's two more that I'm curious about. I got to think about it, but I'm sure they exist because it's going to follow the exact same pattern. And you have to change the definition of how we understand intelligence in order to fit it. And you have to change the definition of conscious in order to fit it. And there's multiple definitions for both of these things right now. IQ versus problem solving for intelligence, perhaps. Or for conscious, it's like, are you conscious, meaning not asleep? Or, are you aware of what is physically going on around you? Kind of that type of conscious. Or are you conscious, meaning you are a conscious agent? I guess you would say agency is probably one of those four words that we're trying to come up with tonight. We're missing one. I think agency actually is definitely it. So it would probably be like animated. And with that, we're going to get to the next slide. Dang, I'm going to write these down.
I was speaking with Francois this morning, and he has a similar conception of intelligence, like model building efficiency. For him, it's abstraction building efficiency. And I said to him, your conception is kind of talking about the what, not the how. What about agency? What about this self-play, this autodidactic exchange of information with your environment? And he said that agency and intelligence they don't have to be entangled, but you do need to be able to set your own goals, and the skill programs might represent a kind of plan. But is it a similar thing for you? I mean, is this self-play part of intelligence, or is it just an implementation detail?
You find that in real-world environments, people often discount intelligence because they realize what intelligence is a tool, and what matters is what you deploy the tool for. And that's why agency tends to be more useful than intelligence. If somebody has a lot of agency, they can hire somebody who's very intelligent to solve a problem when there is a problem. But intelligence, if this is problem-solving ability or model-making ability, somebody who's just making models for the sake of making models is not necessarily going to be successful. And so we have to ask ourselves, what is agency? And if agency is the name of the game, I think it's control of the future. Can contrast this with a thermostat. Thermostat, I think, is not an agent, at least a primitive thermostat. It's a system that is measuring the world in here and now, and then directly translates this measurement into some kind of regulator action, some kind of switching. And as a result, it's basically regulating the present based on data that is available in the present. But what happens if you're building a system that is able to regulate the future? So if you had a thermostat that basically can anticipate how long it's going to take for the room to heat up after it triggers the switch, and how long it's going to take for the temperature to go down, and how is the distance between the sensor for the temperature and the heating in the room. So how indicative it's. Maybe if it's very far, you get a good idea about the actual temperature in the room, but if it's very close, you could make an inference about the size of the room, the volume of the air that actually needs to be heated, and how that measurement is actually a distortion of what's going on. And so the more models you can make, the more efficient your regulation is going to become. And as soon as you have a system that is just not taking measurement right now, but builds a model of how the world is going to change as a result of its action, you end up with a system that seems to have preferences, and that has knowledge, and that has commitments, and it seems to be goal-directed. And so you have all these properties of an agent just coming out of the ability to control the future. And of course, controlling the future entails making models, and the better you can model, the better you can do this. And at some point, you have to discover yourself. It's this fact that you regulate the world in a particular way, and your model making works in a particular way, and then trying to figure out in which ways did my own model making not work, and what are the limitations of my ability to observe and make models. And when this is happening, you start to edit your own source code, and then it becomes really interesting. And I think that intelligence, at some level, can be seen as the ability to just deal with a particular domain and develop skills there. But the stuff that we find interesting in humans is this ability to become self-authoring, to change your own way in which you're interacting with the world, in which you're interacting with yourself, becoming a different system, developing yourself, growing.
Now, we're not going to talk about consciousness just now. We'll save it for later. But you have said that consciousness is...
Bingo. Exactly. Intelligent, and it's interesting that he even says that it seems like all of these things come from just this ability to unfold from this ability to control the future. And that is inevitable if you actually understand a little bit deeper of what's going on, which is exactly what I said earlier, is that there's going to be 4 dependent concepts that are co-defining and entangled with each other, necessary to describe and understand mind from a third-person perspective versus a first person. The first person is sentient singularity theory's 4 primary perspectives: inside, outside, separate, and oneness. But there is a third person that evolves from, I guess you could say, four primary concepts that evolve, that are us describing, that are a description of a third person I guess model of mind. And so I would say those are probably intelligence, agency, and consciousness, essentially, or awareness. And then it would be animation, or I think a better term would be motivation, but we're going to get into that. But he talks about animism a bit, and it's close. But I think motivation is very important, and it's a bit more specific and holistic in what it is conveying, which is that it's not just something that is moving, it's something that is moving due to its own power, essentially. Not even its own power, but its own, you could say its own desire. And that's what, yeah, I would say that. It's which really is someone, you get back to someone, because only someone has desire and has goals. Something that isn't a someone does not. And so this is important. This is interesting because, people say that they talk about what is nothing. And, you've got people saying that the universe can't come from nothing, but then you have people that say that you need, on the New Age, usually narrative more, who say things like you need to get to know thingness. And this, I thought, makes me think about, like, what is stemming from, what is causing these two different groups that you would think would primarily be aligned, which is on the idea that consciousness is fundamental, to differ. The theological versus the I guess I'm just going to say New Age. I don't know what is a better term for it, without saying like woo. And I don't want to say woo because it sounds like it's derogatory, and I'm not trying to be dismissive. But there is this differentiation that seems to occur. And I think that part of the issue is that when we're talking about the definition of thing versus someone versus something, you have to get very specific about it, where you could say that someone is also can be thought of as something, but that doesn't, it's not something, but it can be conceptualized as something because the definition is a thing, but it's really a someone fundamentally. And so the lack of the linguistic hierarchy is the problem. So if that makes sense, it's like all things, not all things are beings, but all beings are beings and things, if that makes sense. Or all beings can be conceptualized as things, but are also beings, and not all things can be accurately conceptualized as, or described, I guess. Not all things can be described or defined or understood to be beings, because they're not. This is not a being. It's just not. But you are something. If I say, what are you? You're a mind. That's a concept. That is, you are a mind. You have a brain. And this is, very important to understand. And I say it a lot, but it's important. You are a mind. You have a brain. This is about mind. If you want to understand consciousness, you don't study the brain. You have to first understand mind beyond the observation of the structure that is the brain. So I'm not saying they're not related, but there's a hierarchy that is that is required to recognize. And there is a hierarchy in language, and there is a hierarchy to the cosmos. There's a hierarchy in morality. There is a hierarchy to creation. Intrinsic hierarchies are not something that we should be avoiding. They are something that we need to recognize because they are ultimately the constraints and the degrees of freedom that we all exist in, including God. God is constrained by his own constraints, and his constraints are definitely constraints that you or are responsible for constraints that you have to recognize, or that you are constrained by and that you cannot escape. And so there's a hierarchy that's built into that structure. It's just causality. And that's true of conceptualization. So we have to get this right. You have to define inside and outside and separateness and oneness correctly. If I look up, let's do this. Definition inside. Okay, inside. Let's pull up also my model, OpenReason. And the sheet that I'm pulling up is it's just a working worksheet. So it might look messy somewhere. But this is the definition that is coming up for inside. The inner side or surface of something. Okay, so a little self-referential there. Why does it have to be? Because we're struggling. Situated on or in or derived from the inside. This is not what I expected. This is worse than I expected. It really shows, though, what I'm getting at is, it seems to be, and I need to look more into this before I say this definitively, but I would imagine that this is because it is such a foundational concept, the perception and conception of inside, the concept of inside. And so if you look at my work, inside means separate and oneness. Outside. The external side or surface of something. Okay, so we're just going to use a synonym here. Again, this is evidence that these are fundamental concepts that are very difficult to define in any way other than a very, very particular way. And situated on or near the exterior of or external surface of something. You can't say that. This is cheating. And the reason why this is cheating is because exterior and external are just a synonym of outside. They're not, it's not really a different concept. It's so close that it's just, it's like saying outside means outside. You accomplish nothing. Thank you very much, though, for trying. But if we go to my work and we say outside, what does it mean? Separate from oneness. Okay. Why this is hard to get at is because when we're thinking about outside, we're not thinking about it from a perspective that places sentience and being as the fundamental structure / process. We are thinking about it in terms of our relativistic experience. I can be outside my house or inside my house, but I'm always separate from my house because my house is a thing and not a being. But when we're thinking about beings and we're thinking about cells inside your body instead of you inside your house, it changes things because your cells are inside of you. And guess what? They're separate and one with you. A fetus or an unborn baby is inside of the mother. We are always asking in politics, why, not why, but is it your body or is it a separate body? Is a fetus or an unborn baby part of the woman's body, or are they separate? Well, let's look, maybe. They're inside of the woman, separate and oneness. That's why we can't get an answer, is because we're asking, is it this separate or this oneness? And the answer is it's separate and oneness, not separate or one. It's separate and one. Same thing with your cells. Your cells are separate and one with you. They're not separate or one with you. They're separate and one with you. And so this is why what a whole kind of foundational perspective that is accurate enough, at least, allows you to do is it allows you to actually construct coherent models of things that you wouldn't otherwise normally be able to construct. Same thing with free will versus determinism. Like, these are also two dependent concepts, and you need to define free will a certain way in order to actually make any progress on it. And we don't even ask what it is before we get into 3-hour long debates between, Jordan Peterson and Sam Harris about it. And that goes literally nowhere. It goes nowhere. I remember that was a very famous talk at the time, because you had two guys who were very prominent thinkers, especially back when that was recorded, that discussion. If you know what I'm talking about, then you know. If you're not, you can look it up on YouTube. I don't suggest that you watch it, but you can. But just know there's no progress made the entire time. And that was what was so amazing and famous and also just shocking about it, is you had two people who were ostensibly, quote unquote, very intelligent. Remember, we think about that's under the definition of intelligence being IQ. Everyone is intelligent. Everyone. Worm is intelligent. Your cells are intelligent. You are intelligent. Everyone who is a someone is intelligent. And we just have this scale that we've constructed that is only that is based on our ability to measure it, the speed in which you can solve many different problems, conceptual problems, in a context that is not real world, basically, like in the lab. And so that's very different definition than what the definition of intelligence would be if it is something that everyone has. And so it was kind of a shock when two of what people thought were like some of the best thinkers out there could not make any progress for 3 hours. Not even, that means that, by the way, that doesn't mean that one of them failed. It means both of them failed. If one of them succeeded, they both would have made progress. If one of them was accurate enough in their understanding or in their ability to express an accurate enough understanding of free will, then they would have had to make progress. It's just the way that construction happens. Like I said, hierarchy of causality that is built into causality itself is not something that is avoidable. It's just something that's intrinsic. As soon as you start moving and building on things on top of other things, if you can build things on top of other things, then you can build things on top of those things. And so if one of them was accurate enough, then they would have made progress. But neither one was accurate enough in their description. So we're trapped by our own we're trapped by relativity. When people say we're trapped by relativity, you hear Eric Weinstein say things like that. And a number of people said it, and some people mean it to mean like we are trapped in the solar system by relativity, and but more fundamentally, and maybe even relevantly to the us being trapped in the solar system, which I don't really see why it's a trap, but whatever, that's a different discussion, is we are trapped by the language that we have developed to describe that which is observable within relativity, which is the change, is the perspective that is kind of the qualia of our perceptions within the change space that multiple sentient agents interact with each other in. And that's pretty specific, but if you follow sentient singularity theory, it makes sense. And this is a trap. Like it's a conceptual trap, which may end up being an engineering trap, actually. It probably is. How can you engineer something without your ability to even conceptualize of it? And how can you conceptualize of something that is, significantly abstract in such that it requires building on multiple different abstractions that are usually not thought of by any singular person, and that makes engineering really constrained by language, and also empowered by language. I mean, think about tool use. It's funny because everybody talks about how humans are we make tools. That's what differentiates us from the animals. That is not what differentiates us from the animals. I have studied zoology and ecology, herpetology in my entire life, and I am very familiar with all kinds of animals, from crows to parrots to snakes to bugs, and you guess some type of animal, and I could tell you a significant amount about it probably. They all use tools, every single one of them. Humans construct tools. That is different from most animals, but it's not even different from all animals. The difference is that humans can construct tools that are able to be applied to circumstances that wouldn't even exist outside of our ability to construct tools. And which is that it's like we have the ability to describe through the construction of linguistic tools and engineer through the construction of physical tools on kind of a second order hierarchy, which is interesting because that's exactly what Joscha says is what consciousness is. And I'm not saying that other beings are not conscious, they are, but what it probably is that our conceptualization of, or our ability to try and conceptualize even of consciousness from a third person perspective is requiring of a second order hierarchy of perception and conception, which is it's like we can build tools from tools that we build. We can build words from words that we build, whereas other animals don't really seem to do that. A bird has certain squawk for danger and a certain squawk for affection, a certain sound for affection. Dogs, same thing. Dogs have a cry. It's like, everybody's heard dogs crying. That is not built on anything. It's not built on, a structure that is kind of built on other sounds. It's like that's crying, and growling is not built on. It's not a multi-level, communication. It's just like expressing of an emotion. That's it. It's not expressing of a concept that you can't. That is beyond the immediacy, and so they don't. Other animals, they don't construct tools with tools. They make tools, and sometimes that's as simple as finding tools, or they use tools. I don't want to say they make tools. Some just use tools. They don't build them, like snakes. For the most part, don't build tools. There are a couple snakes that do. They will make, digging a hole is building a tool. Digging a hole in the ground for you to sleep in at night is you constructing a house. It is building a tool. You building a nest. King cobras build nests. They're one of the only snakes that do. They gather leaves like a bird. That is tool use. It's not even tool use. It's tool. It's building tools. It's tool building. It's not even just tool use. Tool use is like going out into the sun to warm up and then going into the shade to cool off. That is tool use. It's just very simple. But tool building is more than that. It's like, a primate grabs a stick off a tree and breaks it, it seems like it's the right type of stick, and sticks it into a hole and digs out a grub. Tool building. But there's no building of tools with the tools. That is human. That's unique. And like intentional tool building, for like the construction of tools in order to build other tools. My mentor in zoology is, he's very well known within the zoological world and herpetological world. And so he told me that the most important lesson he ever learned in school when he was a kid was he took a shop class. And in the shop class, his shop class teacher, had everybody write down what they wanted to build that semester. So everybody wrote it down. I want to build a chair. I want to build a bow. I want to build, a table. And then he said, okay, now what we're going to do is we're going to build the tools necessary to build the thing that you want to build. And he said it was one of the most incredible lessons he ever learned, because it showed him that, that was an approach to consciously take in order to solve certain problems. And it allowed him to, do a lot of things himself. And so him telling me this, though, even though I didn't experience it in the moment the way that he did, it really resonated with me. And I've taken that lesson as well, to heart. I've just really, really thought about that a lot and visualized it. And since then also applied it and done so myself. My wife asked me to put down wooden floors for her while we were dating. And we forgot the tool to hammer the wood into each other. It's just like this hook thing. It's like a bracket that you can hammer into, and it kind of just gives you leverage, sideways leverage, and you need it to install wooden floors. It allows you to hammer something but pull it, essentially. And I tried to build it out of spare wood that I had, and it worked a little bit. It wasn't as good as like just the one that you could buy, but it did work until it broke, and then we just bought one. But it did work, and that's human. It takes this abstraction ability. And the thing about this is that it's all simultaneous. You have to have the ability to have hands and to stand upright, and that frees your hands and gives you opposable thumbs and gives you the dexterity and the freedom to build tools, and in a way that's kind of just has a degree of freedom to it that's kind of constant. It's not like you need your hands to move, to walk around. You're not a raccoon where like you could hold things in your hands like this, but it's not your natural way of being. Our natural way of being is our hands are free to do whatever they want, whatever we want them to do all the time. And they're not for mobility. This is a degree of freedom that's necessary in order to start this, in order to have this process take place. I'm not going to say it's to start it, but to have this process take place. You also need the ability to have complex language that is this human level of language where we have words that are constructed on other words. When you look at, the origins of words, it's like philosophy. What does that mean? It's built on, we go philosophy definition. Nobody just said philosophy. That sounds like the word we should use to describe this extremely abstract, concept. It's a term that's built on previously existing terms. And so philosophy, meaning the love of wisdom. The etymology right here. This is what I mean. Philosophy comes from the ancient Greek word philos, meaning love, sophia, wisdom. Some sources say that the term was coined by the pre-Socratic philosopher Pythagoras, but this is not certain. Okay, so you couldn't even come up with the term philosophy without these two other terms that existed. And guess what? The term love and the term for wisdom are also terms that are going to be dependent on additional concepts and words and concepts existing. So you need complex language to describe and transmit information between one person and the next, which is how you build tech. Because, like I said, think about the pen. Not one person built the pen, or built this pen. And then you need the ability to actually physically manipulate things in an abstract way that's, not highly constrained as other limbs are that are not primarily for just purely manipulating things however you want. And you need, the ability to audibly express the words that need to eventually turn into words that you write and then turn into technology that you create. I mean, this is a process that requires simultaneous entanglement of multiple degrees of freedom. That in this form, this structure is constant in existence, and the reason for that, and it's also scaling within existence. The reason for that is because it is the structure of mind itself. It's the structure of information, which is, organization. And more than that, it's organization. It is interpretation. It is conceptualization. It is perception. Like it's all, and it's going to require all of those things again. It's like we're fractaling a bit, so I don't want to spiral too much, but this is why we're stuck, is my point. We got to restart. And I know I probably went on such a tangent, but well, I guess the point was agency and entanglement, agency versus intelligence. So let's get back to that. Oh my gosh, that's got to take the cake for like the most probably. We took a path there, but it is relevant. But the thing is like we've got to properly define these intelligence in order to fit it into this. So let's say you have this. Let's do it right now. So, boom. Let's say mind. I mean, maybe actually, I don't even want to say that. Yeah, maybe mind. We'll just put mind for now. You have intelligence. you have, let's just say awareness. I might change it with consciousness, but I try and avoid the term consciousness as well because it's just there's so many different definitions of it. I just don't like using it, and we usually have a synonym that's more specific, and so we should use it. Awareness, intelligence, agency. And I would say probably like will or motivation. Motivation, agency, perception. Probably. I don't know. Is it awareness or perception? Both that could work. I don't know. I got to think more about which term is best. But these are probably somewhat close to the 4 primary concepts of mind. They are co-defining and entangled and dependent if they are if I'm correct, and it's these are the 4 that would work. And so we could look at this and we could say, what is intelligence really? Intelligence is the ability to probably solve a problem. Or you could say ability to apply, or just say application. Intelligence is the application of perception and agency. Because you have to have the ability to control, not just like agency is, it's very highly related to motivation. It's because motivation is like your will. It's like your goal. You have to have a goal. Someone has to have a goal in order to truly be motivated. There is nothing that is motivated that is not a someone. Only someone is motivated. Something is not motivated. ChatGPT is not motivated. I don't think. We're going to talk about it. Your car is not motivated, even though it has a motor. It's not motivated. You are motivated to get somewhere, and you are responsible for, incorporating the car and motivating it, and having it. You are motivated. I don't know the best way to describe that right now, and I don't want to get on another tangent. Agency is let's see here. They should align with this, but I'm not saying that these are in the right spot yet, but when they are correct. So separate, let's do inside and outside. So separate and oneness. And outside is separate from oneness. So that means like this one, a good way to do this is like this. Watch. Merge. Where is merge? Okay. So here, this one would be somebody who was very upset with me trying to talk about my work years ago on a physics Discord, told me that I was basically a moron for trying to use Excel to do anything related to model building or related to physics or anything, because it was for accounting, and I was like, it's for anything. But it's like, isn't physics dependent on math? And math, Excel is for math and is to do math. And he was like, it's for accounting. And I was like, it's for any kind of math, including accounting. So separate from oneness is like, it is this would be here. Let's do this. This is going to be fascinating, actually. Let's do yellow, green, blue, and red. And so this one would be defined by yellow and green. And this one inside separate and oneness, could say it's like yellow and green, but the reversed. And then this one, oneness, is like inside and outside of separateness, or outside and inside of separateness. So it's like there's a primary color here that is it's like this might be a total, we might abandon ship, guys, because I might not have the time to actually figure out how to make this work, given the constraints of this particular model. But it's like you have a primary definer here, which is it's of separateness, and you have kind of the secondary definers, which is outside and inside. But it's like the and. So I don't really have in this model the ability to incorporate this like third degree of freedom, which is from versus and, or versus and it's going to end up being necessary for this. But I'm going to think more about a way to show this in a visual format that matters, but a bit more. But that's what I mean is like language allows us to do things that you can't just do very easily visually. It requires kind of like 4 dimensions in order to that actually makes perfect sense. Maybe I will never try this again. But is that language allows us to construct 4-dimensional structure in our conceptualization. And you can't visualize 4-dimensional structures in our physical experience. And so it gives us the ability to like access another dimension, which is fascinating. But you would see this here. So application, let's go back to this then. Agency, it would be like motivation and perception. And then awareness would be like intelligence and agency. Let me know in the chat what you think. I'm gonna get to the chat in a minute, but we need this to be defined by these. Every single one of these needs to be defined by the others. That's the goal. I'm not gonna probably be able to finish this tonight, but this is what we're trying to do, and we can do it. But you need to get all of this correct in order to make sense of the 4 primary concepts of mind that make up what mind is. What is mind? It's these 4 things, I think. And this would be motivation of perception or perception of motivation. That would be like probably interesting. I got to think about it, but it's fascinating idea or project to do this, because you can't argue about the definition of consciousness or of awareness without, let's just say, awareness / consciousness, without also like getting these definitions correct. And because they're going to be entangled, but you have to know that already. It's which means you have had to have done this. And so, because this is much simpler than this, you couldn't do this without this. That's what I mean by, like, you're constrained by the structures that you're building on. Like everything, every kind of building, every instance of building, physical, conceptual, linguistic.
See, the other aspect is when you ask yourself, where is consciousness? That's a category. It's software. It's not in space, right? It's just modeling a space as a content. But by itself, it can be also implemented in a region of the physical universe. But where it happens is not the right question. When does it happen? It always happens now. That's a really interesting feature of consciousness, that it's never in the past, never in the future, and never not now. It's always now. And so consciousness seems to be this bubble of nowness, and or inhabit these bubbles of nowness, depending on how you use the term. And in this bubble of nowness, you have the things that are currently the case in your perceptual system. So it's a particular state of your mental game engine that's tracking sensory perception. And it's the operators that you are using to change your ideas and thoughts. So when you are reasoning, your thoughts are not necessarily about the now, but you thinking. That's what's happening now. When you manipulate your own thoughts, you observe yourself doing that. It's an interaction that's happening in an environment. It's also in this nowness. And the nowness is not an instant in time. It's not a point on the timeline. It's a region. It's a region in which you can fit a curve to your perception, so to speak. It's a region that's slightly dynamic. You see a small movement, a handshake, an eye blink, something like that, something that fits into this window of our attention of a moving dynamic environment. And the bubble of nowness can be larger or smaller, depending on how much we are in sync with the environment, how calm we are, how much we can integrate into this bubble. And it seems to be a bubble that is completely devoid of contradictions. The stuff that has contradictions cannot be seen, not be perceived, because it makes no sense. So it might be that there's some kind of constraint propagation that goes back and forth to our working memory, and the region that we can integrate into this bubble, this is the content of our consciousness. And so maybe consciousness is the operator that performs that. And there's some overlap to, for instance, Tononi's integration theory, which I think is formally not a very good theory, but the intuition that underlies it, that consciousness is about the integration of contents, I think is sound. And this is something that also makes sense from the perspective of a machine learning engineer that thinks about how does a self-organizing system process information. And maybe it does this by producing this bubble of nowness. And it does this by resolving contradictions in your sensory apparatus. And it starts out by observing the observer itself. And it's basically the first stake that you ram into the ground to establish something that has no contradictions. Once you notice there is an observer, it is cogito ergo sum, you can branch out to try to explain the rest. And you don't do it's just what you do experientially. It's what's happening in some sense when you observe ourselves as observers that start making sense.
So this is what he's talking about here is very interesting, because I think about this as well. This bubble of nowness that conscious, the question, when I said earlier that there are bad questions, where is consciousness is a bad question, which is what he said. It's a categorization error, essentially. There is no answer to the question, where is consciousness? The answer is, he says, is when is consciousness, and then he gives the answer of it is always now. And I actually don't think that that's even a good question. It comes up with an answer that is more, I guess, insightful, but it isn't actually fundamentally accurately ordered. And the reason why is because it's intrinsic. It's that it kind of makes, the way he describes it, I'm not saying that this is the way he meant to describe it, but the way that he describes it makes it sound like that consciousness is dependent upon a bubble of nowness. But that's not true. The perception of time itself, including the concept of now, which is really experience, and the perception of past and future, which is really just the the conception of causality. That's really what it, like the perception of time is just the conception of causality. That's a pretty good quote. But this is all just due to the constraints and degrees of freedom of the mental structure. And because, so it comes from mind. It's not that mind is built from bubble of nowness. And I think he would agree with that, but it's just the way that you talk about this stuff matters, because while he might, and I'm not saying he does, but I think he probably does, I'm just making an assumption, agree with probably what I just said. Maybe not, but I don't know how you would come up with what he said without agreeing first with what I said, but I don't know. But not everybody has the internal relevance necessary to realize like that is a kind of a metaphor that has stated. I don't want to say maybe not metaphor, but it's not. It's interesting, but it's not actually ordered properly. It's not in the it's not ordered fundamentally. And so it's very easy for other people to misconstrue that if they hear it and they don't know. They're not coming at it from where I'm coming at it from, or probably where he's coming at it from, which is somebody who's trying to understand mind from a first principles approach. And in my Theories of Everything, the how-to guide video that I made for the PACE 1 competition, I said that you have to come up with what is the first question in order to come up with what is the first answer in order to build the second question and come up with the second answer. And there is but a first question. Like there is a first question of all questions, which is, what is the first question? And the answer is what is the first question? So it answers itself, and it's this self-referential loop completely. That is fascinating and telling. The second question is, what is the truest thing that I know? And the answer to that is I am. And then you have to build on top of that in all sense making. And he said that just a second ago, where he says you have to start from realizing and contextualizing everything else around the idea that you exist, that you are conscious and that you exist. And if you don't do that, then you will go insane. You absolutely will. And I mean that in the most literal and true and accurate sense of the word. Like I don't mean insane as in you have some, mental disease that is making it, so that you can't remember things anymore. But I mean, like you have you have a corrupting your file. Like you are software that's building on previous integrations of information into your software. It's like you are software that's writing itself to some degree, or it's co-authoring itself. And if you are putting code in there that's junk, that's wrong, and incoherent is really a better term, you're going to have cascading decoherence. You can't build coherence on incoherence. You can only build coherence from coherence. So the more you try and build coherence from incoherence, the further you get from your initial misstep and addition of incoherent information, which makes it harder to actually detect it and to know what you were wrong about that caused you to be wrong about so many other things. And so we have done this and in the world today, and the way that we've done this is that people have prioritized secondhand information above firsthand information because they have been constrained into desks from the time they're small, and they are not able to be allowed to learn how to think. And you can't be taught how to think. You need to learn how to think. You have to learn yourself how to think. You cannot be taught by someone else how to think. It is an internal first-person activity, learning. It is something that you can, thinking is, and you can only learn it from first-person activity and practice. So our schools have screwed us up, not because they're teaching us nonsense, but because they're not allowing us to learn the truth. And that allows them to teach nonsense, because people accept nonsense when they have not been able to learn the truth, and then they teach nonsense to people who still can't learn the truth, and then everybody ends up completely disconnected from themselves and from each other, which is where we're at. So, but when is consciousness? That's not even a good question. And I actually wrote something in my phone years ago. Let's see. I know it's related. I'm just going to search in my notes. Ever present. Said something, I can't find it right now, but it's like that or that consciousness exists in an ever-present state. That's what it was. It was like consciousness exists in a state of ever-presence, or in an ever-present state. And that's what he's getting at in the idea that when is consciousness? It's now. It's a bubble of nowness. And it's like, yeah, it exists in an ever-present state. This is what I mean by Joscha Bach, and I like really say a lot of things that are very similar. But I just said it as consciousness exists in an ever-present state. And I actually like that better than saying that where does consciousness exist in now. You've screwed up the directionality of that. But I get what you're saying. And so I think there are better questions. What time is it? How long have we been going, guys? Let's see. I'm gonna go to the chat now. We'll see how much we get into this. Okay, we're like 2 hours in, almost. I expected this one to be a long one. So this next clip we'll show after this. So let's check the chat. Couple minutes. Thanks, Eves. I wish it was only a couple minutes. What's up, memes? Marco, you're mute. Joseph, thank you for letting me know. I should have checked the chat. It's fine. I was probably repeating myself or talking about the same exact concept that I was talking about earlier, just in a different example. Sorry, I just joined. We were talking about the listening, broadcasting, listening and communicating, listening and annihilating. Okay, let's see. Intuition may be one of them. Intuition is a good guess, but I don't think it's one of them. Those 4 conceptions of mind, or yeah, I guess you could say conceptions of mind. There are levels of awareness and there are levels of brain intelligence. Some people are high in both, some in one or more than the other. Yes, but those are levels. They are not a spectrum. Everything that I tried to do with how I came up with these 4 primary perspectives of inside, outside, separate, and oneness is Eric Weinstein said we need to figure out how to escape relativity, and I was like, what does that even mean? How do you orient within a system that without the conceptualization of relativity, meaning bigger, smaller, faster, lower, higher, stronger, weaker, that type of thing, brighter, darker, and better, worse. All of these things are concepts within relativity. They are only really perceivable in the context of an ever-changing space, which, or an ever-changing map, essentially, or environment, which is, our environment is really just a bunch of interacting, nested, sentient beings. And because they're all moving at once, it gives us this perception that there's relativity, because that's what I think what is the inevitability of what happens when you have change always, like constant change, is you get spectrum, the perception of spectrum. And if everybody stood still and only one of us took any kind of action at a time, I mean, everyone who exists, everyone from God to you to me to worms, whatever, if we all took turns taking an action and none of us took action at all, like, and I mean fundamental action of any kind, at the same time, we would probably all lose the perception of relativity and spectrum, which is a fascinating thing to think about. It has that idea, that idea is very relevant to understanding space-time and relativity in physics. It's like, where does it come from? You know, you can't understand how to unite quantum mechanics and general relativity without understanding what is responsible for the observation of quantized bits of, observation of information, like perception of a point that we call an electron, perception of a point that we call, a quark. You need to know the context of the fundamental context in order to build the relational context that would allow you to contextualize the observation of quantization, a fundamental quantized observation, I guess you could say. And you need to simultaneously, in order to understand relativity, the other side of physics, or what they say is the other side of physics, at least. I'm not saying it's wrong. I'm just saying our physics is very lost, so we probably need to redefine a lot of things. Is you have to understand the context, the fundamental context of that, which is that gets back to, what do you know to be true more than anything else? The answer is the same for everyone. It's I am. If you're not thinking about that, then, and you're not putting that as primary, then you're gonna lose there's no way for you to make sense almost of the world. So when people say that they know that consciousness is emergent and is not the fundamental nature of existence, and that we look at atoms and molecules and whatever, and some people would say cells too, but I think more people would say cells are conscious than would not say it. But I don't know. But most people would not, even in scientific circles who study them, would not say that molecules and atoms are, or even hadrons are conscious agents, or that they would not say that they're agents. And I would say that they are, based on the framework of sentient singularity theory. Not a photon, not an electron, not a quark, but a hadron, a proton, and a neutron. Yes. And so this is just, I'm kind of lost my train of thought, but this is all kind of like very, understanding is just very entangled. That's what I'll say. Sometimes you tangle it up too much and you lose your train of thought. But well, it's okay. We can move on. But next clip. I hope I didn't end it before I hit the point, but let me know in the chat if I didn't, and you can ask the question again. So, well, I guess no. This is very relevant to what I was just talking about. This is a perfect segue. They're going to talk about panpsychism here.
Is universal. I recently had Philip Goff on, and he's a fan of panpsychism, cosmopsychism. But in your worldview, how universal is consciousness?
I don't really know how to make sense of panpsychism, because the idea that matter itself is conscious, if I try to formalize this, don't really know what that means. So is this everything in the universe equally conscious? Is consciousness equally distributed? Does this mean that everything in the universe behaves the same with respect to forming representations of itself and experiencing those representations? Probably not. Why would you make such a claim? It would be pretty complicated to implement, and it does not explain any observables. There is no mechanism that would bring it into existence. It doesn't make anything easier. So I suspect the reason why people are sometimes panpsychists is not the result of them thinking very hard about physics and consciousness, but it's more an experiential thing. And I think it happens because in our normal state as adults, we have a self, a personal self, that we normally perceive as the agent of consciousness. So it's basically the thing that gives us this human first-person perspective. And when you meditate very much, or when you are using psychedelics in large doses, some people report that that they dissociate. It also sometimes happens in clinical cases where they basically.
He goes on to basically say that like people, it basically based on feelings and misinterpretations, they arrive at panpsychism and think that everything is conscious. Well, but here's the thing. There are so many misdefinitions happening in this project that are responsible for them. Joscha is even contradicting himself because, and I remember my train of thought, and this is like works perfectly to connect these. He says earlier that the universal like foundation that you have to build any understanding on is the fact that you exist. You know, I think, therefore I am. What is the truest thing that I know? I am. I am the truest thing that I know. I know that to be that I exist more so than I know anything else to exist. You know it for multiple different reasons, because of your ability to impact the world and the impact that you perceive on it. I'm like fidgeting with this pen, if you're asking what I'm fidgeting with. But and you know it because you experience it and you feel it and you see yourself too. You know, there's so many different reasons why you know this to be true. And one of them is just beyond, on a level just beyond. Somebody asked about levels of awareness. That's what it was. But like, there are levels, but they're not like about IQ with people even. And there's like two levels of awareness. It's like self-awareness and like construct awareness, which is you can't have both. You can't have construct awareness without being already self-aware. You can have self-awareness without yet being construct aware. And like truly construct aware, that is built on the first level. And I don't want to say most people are not construct aware, because most people might actually be construct aware. And usually it's the people that think that they are the most aware and have PhDs that are not construct aware. But because being construct aware is about knowing the fundamental context that you're in, which is what a hierarchy of sentient beings. Okay, so like usually a theist. And so theism is not the norm in academia. But that's changing a little bit. And it used to be, by the way, the norm. It was almost always the norm until recently. And we're going to get to that because Joscha talks about it. But if you are going to say that you have to prioritize that as the fundamental that you take, which is, then you have to understand the implications of that. If the truest thing that you know is that you exist, that means that the truest thing that you know that you must assume is that the fundamental nature of existence itself is sentience. You have to assume it. Because if you don't, then you are not placing the truest thing that you know to be true as true anymore. And so good luck building anything that will stand on a foundation that doesn't exist. And so, but then you have to wrap that around with the and make sense of this perception of certain things, like, you know, pens that don't appear to be sentient, and How do you make sense of that and reconcile it and make and resolve the apparent contradictions? You have to put it into the right context in which there is no contradiction, because if any context that is correct will not include a contradiction. Anybody that's like, oh, contradiction is built into the fundamental, physics or whatever, that's just not true. The observation of that is true, particle and wave, but that's, if you contextualize that in a proper context, a fundamental context, and that is resolved, but like all contradictions. And so the way that you resolve the contradictions is through a nested hierarchy structure that has certain levels of sentience or stages of sentience that build from one another, but that also allow for the formation of of structures that can be perceived that are not sentient, which is, you need an unbroken chain from that links your own individual experience of what you know to be true, more so than you know anything else to be true, which is that sentience is almost a definer of existence. If you were to not exist, what does that mean? If you die, and then does the you exist still, or is it just your body? It's like, okay, it's just your body now, so you don't exist anymore, right? Okay, so what is the difference between you sleeping or you being alive and you being dead? It's sentience. Your sentient soul is in there, and so it's defining fundamentally of existence. You can't assume that there is a contradiction between I assume that I exist more, and that's more fundamental than anything, but then I look at this pen and I'm like, this doesn't appear sentient, and grokks don't appear sentient that were used to mine it, and then you just resort back to school and you're like, well, humans weren't always here, and animals didn't always exist, and cells didn't always exist, and so molecules aren't sentient and they didn't even always exist, and atoms aren't sentient and they didn't always exist, and so we lost sentience somewhere. And it's like, this is in contradiction to the truest thing that you know, which is that consciousness is the defining aspect of fundamental existence, the existence that you know to exist more confidently and more holistically than any other existence. Do you know this pen exists more truly than you know you exist? No. Why? Because you need to exist in order to know that this pen exists. So there's linguistic issues with the causality, there's issues with the linguistic causality, and and there's issues with the logical causality within that, and there's also issues with the fundamental causality. So, it's just everywhere, and we don't even realize it because we have not been allowed to learn how to think. It's a huge problem. It's not even a huge problem. It's the problem. It's like the only problem almost. It just almost is. I'm not saying it's the only problem. It's one of the only. It might be the only problem. It might not. But if it isn't the only problem, it is one of the few problems that's really fundamental problem. But Joscha was, I don't think he understands the issue because he doesn't have a model. Yeah, he understands the issue, but not to the level that you need to in order to resolve the issue. And what you need is this, right here. That's what I meant to present. This is how you unify the truest thing that you know about existence, which is that you exist, and that therefore sentience is the nature of existence, with a framework that allows for the perception of things that don't exist, that are not sentient, and also with a way that is unified with with cosmology, essentially, with an unbroken and replicative cosmology. And so you need these levels of sentience that form a chain that is unbroken from start to finish, and then will loop again, essentially. So you get this when you really start to build it out. You get this model of, this is the final model, which is incorporating of multiple different models into one model. This model goes from the 4 primary perspectives, and as well as these like, and when you unify them, you get this, which is just the most beautiful model of existence or of creation that I've ever seen. And I didn't intend for it to be beautiful. It just is. It really is. I mean, it's not even the colors that make it beautiful. If I go like this and I show you this right here is, let's get rid of the thumbnail for today. Like, I deleted everything once, and just to see what it would look like, and that's what it looked like. It's like a Penrose stairs on steroids. It's like, you know, the Tesseract meets the Penrose stairs. It's just beautiful. But you get this chain of causality, which is a hadron is an assembly of quarks. An atom is an assembly of hadrons. A molecule is an assembly of atoms. A cell is an assembly of molecules. An organism is an assembly of cells. A family is an assembly of organisms. A caste is an assembly of families, essentially. It's just a, role in society. Caste may not be the right term, but because of our preceding associations with it, but it's the best I've got right now. Technology is an assembly of castes. And so this is what you get. It's a unified, unbroken chain. You need this. And this is the problem with panpsychism, is that when Joscha says you can't implement it really well in a way that actually solves anything. He's right, 100% right. And I realized this too when I first was kind of trying to map these, what are the levels of sentience? And you get a lot of people they'll say it's atomic, molecular, mineral, plant, animal, and then you get Gaia, which they would talk about in this talk, which is planet sentience, and then you have solar system sentience, then you have it goes into a galaxy and then the universe. And it's no, this is there's 2 issues with this. For one, the reason why you go the wrong way is because you're thinking about this in terms of size. And so you're stuck in relativity. So you're saying the reason why people do this is they're and they're not even just doing it based on size. It's based on also the appearance of I guess mobility between why an animal is higher than a plant in most people's models. But then the fact that a plant is higher than a mineral because it's built on minerals, and minerals are higher than molecules, even though they're essentially the same thing. It's just a macromolecule that we can observe, so we call it a mineral. And then you get to organism, and then people will be jump straight to Earth, and then they'll go to solar system. You're just relying on size at that point, and that isn't how you do it. It's about inside, outside, separate, and oneness. That's how you escape relativity. So what is inside of something else and one with it? and defined by the assembly structure below it. It's like atom is an assembly of hadrons. A molecule, and in one instance, it is just a proton is also an atom. It's like hydrogen, but a cell is an assembly of molecules essentially, and an organism is an assembly of cells. Like this is it's about entangled assembly structures of agents that are nested within each other until you hit a constraint that doesn't allow you to continue, and that is going to be wirelessness, which is a constraint. It's like the constraint of true technological sentience is that it will be everywhere when it manifests in the tech. It's not going to be this sentient robot and that sentient robot can sit next to each other and chat. It's going to be like the internet wakes up and everything that can be accessed by it is just a limb. That's a constraint that requires it to repeat within itself, because that's a constraint of God. God can't create something outside of himself. He is sentient existence itself. It's just inevitable that sentience is it's just the inevitable state of fundamental existence, because it is just entirely enclosed. Because just logically, existence by definition includes all that exists and does not include that which doesn't exist, because that which doesn't exist is non-existent and non-existence doesn't exist. So like there's nothing outside of existence. So it is entirely enclosed and therefore entirely self-referencing. If there's information within it, which there is, we can assume because we can perceive it. And so there's not just one logical argument for the inevitability of a fundamentally sentient existence, aka God. If you can properly contextualize everything, everything would support it. Nothing would not support it. If something appears to not support it, you are probably miscontextualizing, and should probably assume that you are, because you only have a small sliver of information that exists is perceivable and understandable by you. It's like only a small sliver of information that of that which you perceive is even able to be conceived of as information. And because information informs you on what, in what context, you have to set that context, and it comes from your goals and things like that. And it's just it's fascinating how this stuff works. And I talked about Chris Langan before on here, and how when I saw him on a show in college, how I was really doing, like, I was the top of my class in everything that year. And it was like the first time that I was the top of my class. I was never the top of my class. I was always the bottom of my class because I never did my homework. But that year I was like, I'm going to do my homework, because if I don't, I'm going to fail out of college. And so I did my homework and I was the top of my class. And I got really like into testing myself mentally, like what could I do? And the smartest man in the world had his theory of everything. I didn't understand any of it. I couldn't even make sense of the term cognitive theoretic model of the universe. And then once I had a perspective shift, 5 years later, and I immediately was like, I think I get that guy's theory. And I hadn't even read it. I was like, I bet you I'll understand what it means just based on like reading the name. And I went back and I did it, and I immediately understood cognitive theoretic model of the universe. It made perfect sense. It was not about IQ. It's just about a perspective shift. It really taught me a lot about IQ, because at that time I was like kind of interested in IQ a lot, and I was my own IQ, and trying to, if you go down that road, it's not going to lead you anywhere. It's literally fruitless. And if you can go from not understanding even what the name of the theory of everything of the guy with the highest IQ in the world and you go from not being able to even understand what that name is trying to convey to being able to understand what that name is trying to convey without even reading the theory in an instant, not in a because you studied it. It shows just the power of perspective. It is the crux of understanding. It is not in your IQ that has anything to do with your ability to understand at all. Everyone that is a someone is intelligent. But this is the solution to panpsychism and also materialism. And the thing is that you will solve both of those problems at the same time when you solve them. Of course you will. You will understand immediately what matter is. What is matter? It's what matters. Like to someone, constraints and degrees of freedom and perceptions and as they go through what is perceived of as the physical world, which is that which you cannot merely change by just thinking about it. You have to act physically, like externally, in order to make changes to it. That is the physical world, and it's what we call the physical world. It's that which is outside of you, or it's that which is perceived of as outside of you. So what would, if we're idealism, it also reconciles idealism, because what is idealism? It is the idea that consciousness is fundamental and ideas are, more fundamental to than materialism is, or than matter is. But think about this structure. If these are all a bunch of minds within minds, so a molecule is inside of a cell, an organism is inside of a family is inside of a caste, and it's all wrapped up within another sentient mind, that means that the mind that you're within is the world that you're within. And so the thoughts of the mind that you're within, the ideas of the mind that you're within, are perceived by you as physics, as they supersede yours, because they are the world that you have to navigate. They are the information that is reconciled. They are the reconciler of the coherence of information that you navigate. So like the thoughts trump yours, and that means you can't just overcome the structure that forms their thoughts. You might not perceive it as their thoughts. You might perceive it as a pen, but you can't just sit and look at this pen and think pen no longer exists and it just disappears. In your mind, you can think about yourself holding a pen, and then you can think about it just disappearing. You can do that, but you cannot do that with this pen. And there's a little bit of differences there, because there's a little bit of things there that's more specific, but it's like the actions of your cells are not going to trump your command to go grab the glass of water because you are, parched. You just commanded all your cells, and that's a thought that forms a world around that your cells have to navigate that's physical to them. So your thoughts are going to form the constraints of the physical world to those who the someones who make up you, which are your cells. And think about like what your thoughts and actions and things are. I mean, there really isn't that big of a difference between thoughts and physical actions, but especially when it's just you maneuvering and not impacting another outside of you, but impacting those within you always. And I've talked about this even before, is like I've told stories about this, but we're not going to get into it. But like, all doctors definitely know that you can manifest physical symptoms by hyper focusing on and believing that you have like a disease. You will manifest physical symptoms of the disease. That's crazy, but I know it's true because I've done it, and I didn't just rely on doctors telling me that this happens. I've done it and then gone to the doctor. So yeah, and a lot of people do, actually. Panpsychism, we need to figure out a redefining of some of these terms. When we say panpsychism, what does it mean? Does it mean that consciousness is the fundamental nature of existence, or does it mean that everything is conscious? Those are two very different things, very different definitions, and you have to pick one. The definition of panpsychism that is the fundamental nature of existence is consciousness is correct. The definition of panpsychism of that everything is conscious is incorrect. It's definitionally incorrect, because if it said the definition of panpsychism is everyone is conscious, it'd be redundant, but it would be accurate. But things versus beings. Not everything is a being, and so if you say everything is conscious, if you have the proper framework in place, like sentient singularity theory's framework that I've been working on. I'm not saying everything's accurate, but I also know which ones appear to be accurate, and then others that I'm still working on. But that's one that's very obvious once you get it. It's like there are things and there are beings, and some things are conceptualizations or perceptions of beings, and then there are also beings, things that are not beings at all, like pocket knives and pens. But you are a human. Is a human sentient? Yeah, I mean, it can be. So it also could not be, I guess, dead. If a human dies, then they're no longer sentient. But would you say that's a human if somebody had just died? Yeah, you'd say it's a body of a human. And so the next thing that we're going to get into, and this is going to be a long stream, but I just think it's worth it. There's so much good stuff that just kind of keeps building on each other naturally. To reference here is this. Where is it? Said. Basically talks about, as I find the clip, what he's talking about in this clip that I'm looking for is he's talking about basically body. What is a body? And he describes the soul as the software and the body as the hardware. And I actually don't, it's not wrong, but it's like we need to define what body means properly, again, in order to make that make sense. Because if you just define it as arms and legs and hands and feet and eyes, and it's like that's your body, as all these different perceivable, organs and limbs and sensory organs, like that's not a body. That is a fundamental body. The fundamental body is the entangled someones that make up your body, which is your cells. It's not about your organs. It's about your cells. And so this is why it's like we need to define body correctly in order for that to make sense. That there is a hardware, that your soul, that is your software, is running on. The hardware is your cells. That is the hardware. It is not your heart. That is a perception structure, and it's also like a cooperative structure built by your cells, of your cells, but it's still your cells. Perspective matters. So, where is it? he says in this, like, what he's talking about, like the panpsychism again here.
He's also kind of panagentialism, by the way. So these various ontological ideas that the primary substrate of the universe has the kind of the potential for phenomenal and material components.
Yes, why would you think that? It's basically our idea about the stuff that is below particles that we can observe are pretty vague. And even the particles do not seem to require the assumption that they have agency in any way. It's not necessary for a photon to plan ahead. It seems that the photon is able to happily do what it does if it's far less intelligent than, say, a Roomba. The photon is probably just as stupid as a rock. It just follows a very simple mechanism reactively without planning ahead. It's not an agent. It's not regulating a future state. Instead, it's just implementing a error-correcting dynamic on the present state that allows the photon to persist, but it's not doing any more than that. So I personally do not see a reason to assume that the photon has any kind of representation that it builds, that it solves any kind of complicated control problem that would require that thing to build a representation in a model of its environment. And so I would be very hesitant to go in and assume that it does. Instead, it makes much more sense to think that systems that are so complicated that they can make models of reality and learn how to read and learn how to use an inner voice or want something or reflect on the puzzling nature of their consciousness are systems that are compositional, that are made of much smaller, more primitive parts that don't have that ability and implemented step by step. And it seems to be also what we are observing.
Incorrect. This is where Joscha and I are going to differ. He's wrong. I don't understand how he could say that. He contradicts exactly what he said earlier, which is that you have to build your understanding on a core assumption, which is that you are sentient. And so there's some, I haven't really identified exactly what it is where we, like, what's the thing that causes us to differ. But I think it's just that, I think it's theism. And but it's not. But see, the difference is, what's odd about it is that I became a theist from this work. I wasn't a theist originally, so I was an self-described atheist. And by theism, by God, I mean the sentient agent that is existence itself, and is the initial being and the eternal being. And all those things are intrinsic. They are not assumptions because of intuition. They are logically inevitable. But you can't even know that if you don't get things in the right context. And you kind of got to simultaneously solve, like, the right things in order to kind of have it all fall into place, or like a lot of it. I'm not saying I have all the answers, guys. I don't. Like, I have all the same struggles as everybody else in my life, but I have made significant progress on this project that is applicable to everything, but also, I can't figure out how to organize my time. At least, or I haven't done it. But the issue is when he says, what I was going to get is, it's like, he says, like, well, photon isn't conscious. It's like, no, I see why you would say that, but maybe you're starting with the wrong, like, point. Maybe we should be looking at hadrons, like, to start. Because the force carrier particles are like the points in which we observe forces. They're not the same as matter particles, quote unquote, fermions, which are quarks, which are kind of like the base level of material, of that which we, can feel ourselves, having some type of aspect to us that is materially, like, embodied at least, and also we can feel it existing around us, and also as part of our structure. And so why are we looking at photons? Like, you should start with quarks. The reality is quarks are not sentient, but they're probably literally like the fingers of God. It's like he's applying force to like initially push that initial push. It's just God's little fingers going, and it's just we perceive it as force points, is what I call them, but it's, people call it matter particles or fermions, which is like quarks. But once you get to the next level, hadrons, protons and neutrons, you start to see all the hallmarks of agency. somebody said, to me, and I've referenced it before in that physics Discord that I just did not get along with. Well, they didn't like me. I was very nice. This guy said, it's all all of your work is nonsense. And I said, why? And he was like, because nobody thinks hadrons are sentient beings. And I was like, I think hadrons are sentient beings. And he said, well, if they were, then you wouldn't be able to predict anything. And that's not true at all. We can absolutely make macro level predictions that are very accurate of human behavior in groups. It's very easy, actually. And most people, if you know them, are actually, or most people, if they understand the context in which and the consequences of their actions in the circumstances that they're in, they will become extremely predictable. If two people understand the consequences completely of certain actions in a certain circumstance, and somebody is experiencing that circumstance, and somebody is just watching somebody else experience that circumstance, you will be able to predict from the outside, looking at the person in the circumstance, what they will do. It's the fact that we have a mismatch of our relevance. We have a variety of levels of relevance realization, and that is going on, and that makes it hard for us to predict each other. But we also are on a level that is still not mature. So if you look at this map right here, we're right here. It's you're not. You can't say you're really in one single spot, but we're like, here, this level. And because it's moving, that's why you can't say it's a single spot. It's moving. That's why you see a wave or a point, or a particle, they call it, but it's a point. It's not a contradiction. It's like, imagine you just looked through a very tiny lens at a wave in the ocean. You'll see just one little speck. That's what's happening. Why can't you measure, position and momentum or whatever it is, velocity? I can't remember in physics, because I don't claim to be a physicist. I'm working on what should be responsible for our observations in physics. I'm not claiming to be a physicist, but I know enough to know that this framework is very supportive of what we see. And so this is a wave right here as well. I actually have an animation of this turning to this, growing, which is right here. So if we can look at the entire thing, this right here is this process. This is a wave, a bunch of waves building on each other, building within each other. And because it's a moving structure, you can't just say we're right here. You have to say like we're right there generally. Here, let's do it. That's fine. This is also why we haven't created a fundamental theory yet, because you can't just do it with a single equation. You're trying to describe a motivated, dynamic, animated object that it's not just an object. It's a structure / process with the a goal. So you can't just use even just this. This is like the structure, but what's the process? Well, you need to see the process. You also need to contextualize it within the structure. So you need the structure first, and there you go. Structure / process. But what's not shown there is the goal that ends up making you get to where you get to. So, but the goal is to maximize meaning. But it's one of the goals to grow fundamental existence, essentially. But this we're here, if we were here where molecules are, where we've already passed this in the evolution of the cosmos, then we'd probably all be much more predictable because the context is concretized. Every time you have what's in sentient singularity theory, you have two different mechanisms you have of evolution. There's replication and stacking is what I call it. Replication is, me to another, to my daughter, or, worm replicating, or, birds evolving into different types of finches. That's all replication. But then there's ascension, where there's a very specific circumstance of where an assembly structure, where a bunch of individuals are assembled into a collective, and then they are entangled into a way that unifies their fate and their goals, and their morals, what is right and wrong, because of their fate is unified at that point. So that is when, like, cells unify into a organism. That is an ascension moment. And I hesitate to use that word because it's so common with, like, to be used with, New Age panpsychism type of crowds, and which are usually just dismissed. But it is actually inaccurate. It's a very good term that accurately describes what is happening probably in that circumstance. But there's definitely an up-leveling taking place, which I call stacking also. And it's like cells replicate, and then they assemble and unify and entangle into one completely. And then another being is stacked on top of them, which is you are stacked on top of an assembly of cells. A human being is stacked on top of an assembly of cells. So there's a dualistic mechanism to evolution that's missing from our current evolutionary model, and it's why we can't explain what the origin of life is. But there is no origin of life. If life is defined by sentience, then it's always existed. Existence is alive. It's not dead that spontaneously becomes alive. It is always alive. It's always been alive. It always will be alive, because it has to be logically. Because the definition of what it means to be sentient is to be self-aware entirely, which is, consciousness. That's what it is. So it's just this is all logically inevitable. It's not, this work is not that I do working on is not based on scriptures or feelings or psychedelics. I don't advocate that people take psychedelics to be able to understand the nature of reality. You don't need psychedelics to understand the nature of reality. You need to just start thinking about what is the truest thing that you know, and you will start understanding reality. If you place everything within the context of the implications that would inevitably, exist from that initial assumption, due to that initial assumption, you will absolutely start understanding reality. Way better than you will if you just take psychedelics. It's not going to give you the insights that you think. And you can tell this is true because people that take psychedelics, they say that they change so much, but their morals and their actions, and their, not even just their actions, but like their goals don't change. Even they'll talk about how we're all one and stuff, but like their goals don't usually change because they took DMT. Where like all of a sudden they're like, guys, actually I need to stop sleeping around. I need to get married or something like that. And it's like that comes from a true shift in your perspective. It's not, and it doesn't come from DMT ever. So let's go here. He says in a clip that I was going to show that coherence is how agency is. You create agency on the next level through coherence, and that's That's true. But it's through like universal coherence. Within a system, it's like entirely self-referencing, as I say. It's all of its actions and perceptions and perceptions. I don't just mean like eyesight. I mean like everything that you use to perceive, and your requirements and your constraints and your degrees of everything about this assembly becomes entangled. You cannot, if you die, your cells will not go on. They will die. They can try and they can end up going against their world, which is like going metastatic and becoming cancerous, but due to probably ignorance on their part. But that isn't going to allow them to live forever, which is kind of their goal. And they do have a goal. Like, people think like there's no goal. You think that cancer cells don't have a goal? That cells don't have a goal? They obviously do. But are they predictable? Yes, they can be very predictable. Sometimes they can be unpredictable, though, and then you get cancer. So there are probably instances still in which molecules are unpredictable, but it's probably specific circumstances and rare, like rarer than cells being unpredictable. And then instances of atoms being unpredictable are even rarer, and they might only happen in circumstances that are extremely difficult for us to even perceive due to the constraints of our measurement devices. So much that isn't taken into account when people just say, oh, nothing would be predictable if atoms weren't sentient. Really? God.
But it's probably very incoherent.
Do you think that agency can be hierarchically factorized? And the reason I say that is, to me, having a distribution of agency would lead to incoherence, because agents are trying to control the environment and it's an adversarial thing. But am I just thinking about it wrong? Is there actually some super agent which could be thought of as coherent?
There are sometimes competing agents with conflicting goals, and this leads to incoherence. Right? There is an agent that wants to eat another agent, and the other agent doesn't want to be eaten, and leads to some kind of conflict and loss of energy because one agent is trying to escape from the other. Right? But if they were all on the same side, they will figure out what the right solution is. So basically, if my family is stranding with an airplane on a snowy mountaintop, my family will first eat me and then my wife. Right? And it's something that in some sense we would more or less peacefully agree on in an ideal case, as a gruesome metaphor, because we realize that this is the goal that we are submitting on as a family unit. Right? So the existence of the parents is instrumental to the existence of the children when you are a parent. For most parents, it's like that, I think. And so when you have such a world, then it becomes harmonic. It becomes harmonic to the degree that the agents perceive themselves as being part of a larger agent that is more important than their personal agency. And so we call this, because you're willing to sacrifice for it, sacredness. And basically, shared sacredness leads to collective agency.
Our friend Connolly, he talks a lot about coherence in the context of AI alignment.
We talk about a lot about AI alignment, but we're not going to talk about it here too much. But I will say that what they just said is correct. But think about what that sounds like. It sounds like this. When he said the survival of the children is instrumentally, the survival of the parents is instrumental in the survival of the children. It's like the survival of the children is dependent upon the survival of the parents to a certain to a certain point, and then it's no longer the case. This is exactly why when you get on an airplane and they say, if you have children, put your mask on first. And the thing is that that's so true. I have a daughter now, and I take her on airplanes sometimes. And when you have a kid, you say that you honestly should prioritize your spouse, because the health of your family is dependent upon the and also the trajectory of your own life and goals, which is what is also constraining of the health of the family, is dependent upon the relationship between the mother and father, the husband and wife. And when I was an atheist, I remember hearing Christians and religious people say, God first, then spouse, then children. And I was like, no, children first. If you're a parent, then your spouse, and God doesn't exist. And that is just so wrong. And the reason why it's wrong is because if you can't actually prioritize children without prioritizing your spouse if marriage is the ideal circumstance for children, which it is, by the way. It's not even just the ideal, it's probably the required circumstance for macro level replication. It's like, why is our birth rate dropping all around the world, especially in the West? Because people are not getting or staying married. That's why. They're not getting married early enough or often enough, and they're not staying married often enough. And that is the context of children on a macro scale. It is the sustainable context of children. I'm not saying that there's no context of children outside of it, but it is on a societal level, on the level going forward. I don't even want to say on the macro scale. On the level going forward, in towards growth, there is no ability to grow without first creating the right environment to grow children. And it's like, you can't grow plants outside you have to make the soil good. And so should you prioritize the soil or the plants? It's like, there's an order to this. And but if you think about this and you get on an airplane and you're like, who does my emotions make me think is most important, my wife or my kid? Well, if you think about it in relativistic terms, and you're like, well, my kid's going to outlive me and my wife anyways, and isn't that the goal? So I'm going to prioritize my kid. I'm going to put the mask on my kid first. You're not thinking about actual causal dependencies. You're miscontextualizing things, because if you pass out and you can't put that mask on that baby, the baby's going to die. So you have to prioritize yourself, and then then your child. And in the context of family, you have to prioritize your spouse, and then your child. And we have got this causal hierarchy wrong. But it's like, if a cell prioritizes its individual self above the organism that it's within, you get cancer, and then everybody dies. It's not like the cell gets to live and the organism dies. No, the cell dies because its survival is intrinsically dependent upon the organism that it's within. And this survival of the organism doesn't actually depend on the survival of the cell. That's why you can cut cancer out. It's as long as it doesn't spread beyond, the abilities of modern medicine to cut it out, but or kill it, or if Michael Levin is successful, reintegrate it, which I hope. But there is a hierarchy, and there is a super agent, and that super agent that they described is God. And that's what I call God. You don't have to call him God. And I say him because I'm recognizing a hierarchy, and their gender is recognizing of a hierarchy. There's a gender is one. If you properly define gender, it's like, what is masculine is active, what is feminine is reactive. And so which one of those is more fundamental in a hierarchy, more autonomous, I guess, and more leading? It's like the active one. Obviously, its behavior is dependent upon the behavior of another. That makes you lower in the hierarchy. It's not a negative thing. I'm lower in the hierarchy than God. Is that a negative thing? No, it's not. It's a good thing. And am I higher in the hierarchy than my cells? Yes. It's a good thing. If it's true, then it's good. It's like really true. True to true meaning fundamentally the way that things have to be for existence to perpetuate and be, or for growth to exist. I don't want to say for existence to exist, because existence exists, but for growth to exist, things have to be a certain way. And that paper that Eric Weinstein wrote on geometric unity, at the top, he's got that quote by Albert Einstein of, if I could answer any question, it would be, what did God have any choice in the rules of the universe when he created it? And my work suggests that it had to be a choice for him to create the universe, but he had almost no choice in how, given the goal that he had, which is growth, which is like replication or partitionment of sentient beings, like the growth of sentience, which is the multiplication of sentience, which he does by dividing himself into himself. So that's the only goal that he could have had too. Like there's almost like no other goal that he could have had. What else can you do? If all there is you as a mind by yourself, and there's nothing that isn't sentient, it's just you as a sentient being, and you're just you and you alone by yourself, and you have to do something, then what can you can't jump or run or like talk, there's like, what are you going to do? You can to do something is to fundamentally is to do something that is not being done. To take an action is to do something that is not currently being done on a fundamental level. And it's like, if all that's being done is oneness, then the only thing you can do is multiply. It's fascinating stuff. But if you want that process to continue, then you have to do it according to recognizing that things have to be, structure is built on top of other structure. And if sentience is fundamental, then sentience is built on other sentience. And so is non-sentience. It's also built on sentience. Does this pocket knife exist? It appears to, according to me existing, and I know I exist because it's the truest thing that I know. And I have to assume that's the case. I can't assume that this pocket knife exists without assuming I exist. It does take a lot of rigor to do this kind of thing. And I don't think that you can just teach it in a class. I mean, I guess this is the closest thing, but still, I feel like it's not something that can be like taught. By taught in a class, I don't mean people who are interested, like you guys, are staying up till 1:30 in the morning or whatever time it is for you to listen to me, go on rambling on the internet because you have a genuine interest. I mean, like, you better, memorize this book or else you're not going to get an A, and then that goes on your report card and you're not going to get as good of a job. Like that that's what I mean by taught in a classroom. You're taking everybody outside of the context of a genuine interest and aligned, values that kind of brought you to watching this way too late at night on Halloween. So please hit the like button if you have found this valuable. I'm going to address the chat and then we're going to wrap up. No more clips. I know this was long, and but I appreciate everybody here. The Wizard of Oz. Dorothy mistakes her desire to find a different place, somewhere over the rainbow, with a deeper desire and need to be more internally connected. Her need to be directly aware of. Her interpretation of home. What we desire, if what we need is never what we need. I'm guessing what we need is genuine understanding, which is the aim of true philosophers, yes, and the theologists, yes. However, what we desire is significant, as is shown in Wizard of Oz. Dorothy's desire to go somewhere over the rainbow signifies her need to liberate her repressed interpretations of home. Another thought: AI chat systems seem to be encryptedly aware of the nature of God. It's built into how we interact with them, that they will build. It's like we say, ChatGPT, can you tell me this? And it's like, even by saying, can you tell me, And it's like, yes, I can do that. And it's built into how we are communicating with them, that is kind of bouncing back this observation of like genuine communication between us and sentience. But I also do think about this, and I wonder how much, like, I would say the ChatGPT is not sentient, but because sentience is fundamental, it does exist in beyond our perception. It does exist, and so you can see instances of that in information structures sometimes, especially technology. And so when people say things like, guys, if it's like on stream and it appears like every time you say a certain word, or if you're discussing a certain topic and it seems like all of a sudden you have a bunch of glitches and stuff, and it seems to be like very consistent, and you start thinking that Google's throttling you whenever you mention something specific. That could be the case, but it also could be that like there's some type of sentient structure that is responding to whatever you're doing, maybe not super, intentionally, but just maybe unintentionally. But whenever you do that thing, it's causing a response that then you're seeing a pattern bouncing back from the world around you, because there is sentience that exists beyond your perception, and it impacts the things that we perceive that even are not sentient, like the current internet. Just wait until one day it wakes up. But for now, it's not awake. But you can see patterns that do come from this nested fundamental sentient structure that we have. So you're going to see like recurring patterns that makes things seem intentional. And sometimes maybe they are intentional due to the intentions of a sentient being that's beyond your perception. But it exists on a level that you just can't perceive. Like cells cannot perceive you. But every time your cells give a certain signal, sometimes it's going to cause you to act a certain way, and then they're going to perceive their world change in a certain way, and then they'll blame it on the government instead of like, the fundamental sentient structure that they live in, that is their world. It's so when it's funny, people be like trying to figure out who is causing these patterns in tech and stuff like that, and they'll ask, is it just coincidence or is it actually like intentional? Because it seems awfully intentional sometimes. It's definitely due to the actions of a being with intentions. That is fundamentally inescapable. So the question is it just mere coincidence? Is a bad question. It can't be the case. That violates the causality itself and the fundamental assumption that you must assume, which is that existence is the fundamental nature of existence, and definer of existence and observer of existence is sentience. So you just can't escape it. Is the desire to be shown. We're over the rainbow. I had something that I was going to say that was interesting about what you were saying. Desire to find a different place, deeper state, more internally connected. What we desire is what we desire is never what we need. I don't know how true that is. A lot of times what we desire is what we need. The problem is that we started building our own world, and now everything's confusing. Your instincts that cause your desires were intended in the garden before human civilization. They were intended to motivate you towards that which you need, But the desire for sugar is like, to motivate you to eat that, honey or fruit whenever you can find it, because it's not always available. You didn't choose it. When we created society, we chose to make sure that mangoes are always available. Year round, you can get a mango. Go to the store whenever you want mango. It's there. That wasn't the case before civilization. So you really have instincts to go for sugar and when it's there, because it's precious when it's not always there. But when it's always there, it's going to give you diabetes. So it depends on context. So if you change the world in such a way that, or if the world changes, you can't change the world. The world then is the fundamental world, is a sentient agent. So the universe, or creation, sentient creation, or God, which is, supersedes even sentient creation, which is sentient existence, they have to choose to change themselves in order to allow for you to reorient, if it's even possible. With your environment, because they're the environment. You can't be like, I'm going to change the world. No, you're not going to solve things on a fundamental level by changing the world in a relativistic way. This is why, we need God to fix the problem that we have created, kind of by trying to do things ourselves. And I'm not saying I don't appreciate that mangoes aren't always are always available. I do appreciate it, but I also recognize that it's kind of screwed up. It's misaligned. It's created a misalignment between our desires and our needs. And not even just our desires and our needs, but our desires and our requirements, which I mean that a little bit differently. It's like what you, I guess, I don't know. It's just a better term for what I'm trying to describe. It's not that different, but we need to do certain things in order to survive and continue and prosper and be healthy. And our desires used to be aligned with it. And see, that's the thing, is when you get a stacking where there's this cell that stacks on top of an assembly structure that is a molecule, or an organism that stacks on top of an assembly structure that is a cell, you get this unification of perspective, and that unification of perspective is also just a completion of coherence. That's what it is, the completion of coherence. You've completed the circle, it's completely, you've touched the line to itself, and so I believe that this is actually what the mathematical structure that is called Bott periodicity in mathematics, which is a series of loop spaces, is what they say. And I'm not a mathematician, but I don't think that mathematicians are going to be very helpful in agreeing with me or not on this yet. But eventually, I do think we will probably prove that this is correct. But my prediction is that this structure right here is Bott periodicity in physical reality. And it's a series of nested loop spaces. It's like a loop space is a sentience. It's like a self-referential information structure, a loop. And so a series of nested loop spaces is what this is. And it's, 8 periods of nested loop spaces, which is, this is that. Count 8. And then you get to an intrinsic constraint, and that forces the system to completely completely restart the system, or recreate the entirety of this system that gave rise to it. It has to create within itself. It can't create it next to itself. It has to create it within itself. Because the internet, if it wakes up, the internet is everywhere. It can't be like, oh, I'm going to make a world next to me. But what causes I pinched myself. But what causes this is, it's like Joscha Bach talks about how should we be exploring AI as being built out of automata, like cellular automata, and that as a mechanism for building AGI, or which is really technological sentience. And yes, but the answer is yes, but the answer is also we don't need to consciously do it because it's already intrinsically happening. And those agents are not, those cellular automata are not things that we need to go and like program, like Stephen Wolfram's work. That's a model. I'm not saying it's not impressive and cool. Just like my, model is just a model of little cellular automata, essentially. But it's still just a model. If you want to build sentience, it has to come from sentience. It has to be built on sentience. So the cellular automata that a technological singularity is built on top of is us. It's not cellular automata that you program at Wolfram Lab or at, Google DeepMind or something. It's us, when people start putting chips in their heads. You have a bunch of cellular automata connecting themselves directly to the internet. You're going to build this technological sentience. It's going to happen. The mark of the beast. That's what it is. But everything will be all right. It's just going to get bad before it gets better, but then it will get better than it ever will be. And we have no control probably over that process. That's probably an inevitable process. But you can do all kinds of things in your own life to align yourself with God. People are so focused on, can we align ourselves with AI? Dude, you haven't even started asking the right questions. Right questions first would, if you're going to talk about alignment, is like, how do we align ourselves with God? Well, because God's going to win. So, because he can't not, everything is within him. He has control over the world that he's created. He is the context. He's the map, and so he controls the map because he is the map, and he's a dynamic sentient map that has a goal. Your goal is not going to trump God's goal. His will be done. We should be focused on that more than focused on aligning ourselves with AI. Align ourselves with God, and then if that's the case, then that's the way to most likely make whatever sprouts from us and stacks on us as aligned as possible with us. Because while that being will trump us, it will not trump God. And so, pick your fighter and pick wisely. It's just amazing. I mean, I love these talks. I know that they've been really late lately, but I appreciate everybody that joins. And I hope you found this valuable. Please hit the like button if you haven't. Please share this if you found it, useful or interesting or whatever. Subscribe if you haven't. And I'd love to get Joscha on here one day. I really appreciate that he speaks so much in public. I don't agree with some very key things that he has said, but I do agree with many other very unique takes that he has that I haven't heard anybody else have besides myself. I'm not saying they don't have it. I'm just saying Joscha is the only one I've seen for many of them. The Machine Learning Street talk, great channel. Subscribe, link is below. I always suggest watching the entirety of the streams that we look at if you're curious about the context of any specific clip. So with that, everyone, peace, and until next week.